Stop, that's my wife. An Amish man screams, seeing a woman being auctioned for $5 on a dusty frontier street. The crowd gasps. The church bell tolls. Shackles rattle as the deputy freezes. The woman, half native, half German, stands tall, though her dignity is being stripped away. But when the man claims her as his wife, the town erupts in whispers. Was it true? Or was he lying to save her? Soon, the truth comes crashing down. She's no ordinary woman. She holds the deed to the valleys last spring, land the railroad will kill to control. And the man who once abandoned her must now fight to protect her. As thundering hooves approach and forged papers appear, will their hidden vows save them or destroy them both before the sun sets? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town square as Deputy Thomas Holly shifted uncomfortably on the wooden platform. His boots scraped against rough planks while he held the binding rope that secured Annalise Summers' wrists. The young woman stood straight-backed beside him, her dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders, her face composed despite the indignity of her situation. $5, Deputy Holly announced, his voice cracking slightly. Bidding starts at $5 for this here woman. He avoided meeting Annalise's eyes. Shame coloring his cheeks. The gathered townsfolk muttered and whispered among themselves. Some chuckled, others shook their heads at the spectacle. The women clutched their shawls closer, while men adjusted their hats against the settling dust of the late summer evening. Look at them eyes. Part Indian for sure, one voice carried across the square. German too, they say. Her papa was that settler up by Crow Creek, another responded. Annalise lifted her chin higher, refusing to let their words pierce her dignity. The wind tugged at her simple cotton dress as she stood silent, her mixed heritage written in the high cheekbones and amber eyes that marked her as different from the townsfolk below. Deputy Holly raised the small wooden gavel, his reluctance visible in every movement. $5, do I hear $5? The sound of boots on wooden steps made him pause. A broad-shouldered figure pushed through the crowd, his plain black hat marking him as distinctly as his suspenders and solid work boots. Josiah Yoder's usually quiet voice boomed across the square. Stop! That's my wife! The crowd fell silent before erupting in gasps and exclamations. Deputy Hale's gavel slipped from his fingers, clattering against the platform boards. Annalise's eyes widened as she watched Josiah stride forward, his familiar face both welcome and painful to see after 2 years of absence. Josiah climbed the steps with purposeful strides, pulling a knife from his belt. The deputy started forward, but Josiah's steady gaze stopped him. With careful movements, Josiah cut through the ropes binding Annalise's wrists. Sir, I cannot allow, Deputy Holly began, but Josiah cut him off. She is my lawful wife, Josiah declared, taking Annalise's hand in his. His touch was gentle despite his firm words. We were married 2 years past before witnesses. The crowd's whispers grew louder. An Amish man? Wed to a half-breed. Someone called out. Josiah turned to address the gathered townspeople, his voice carrying clearly across the square. I left my community to marry her. It was my choice, made before God and man. His fingers tightened protectively around Annalise's. Annalise studied his face, confusion and hurt warring with the spark of hope his words kindled. 2 years of silence lay between them. 2 years of wondering why he had abandoned her after promising forever. Yet here he stood, claiming her publicly despite the scandal it would surely bring. The women in the crowd pressed closer, scandal and gossip lighting their eyes. The men muttered among themselves, some shaking their heads at the notion of an Amish man wedding a woman of mixed blood. Deputy Holly ran a hand through his hair, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cooling evening air. I cannot proceed with the sale if she's a married woman, he stammered, glancing anxiously toward the sheriff's office. "There's still the matter of," he began, but swallowed the rest of his words at Josiah's stern look. "There is unfinished business," the deputy finished lamely. Stepping back from the couple, Josiah helped Annalise down the platform steps, his arm steady as she regained her balance. The crowd parted before them, creating a path lined with shocked faces and pointing fingers. Annalise walked beside him with her head high. Though her heart pounded with questions she longed to ask. Together, they walked away from the town square, leaving behind a buzz of conversation that grew louder with each step. Ladies gathered in clusters, fans fluttering as they whispered behind gloved hands. Men stood in doorways, watching the unlikely pair with narrowed eyes and thoughtful expressions. "Did you see how he just claimed her?" One woman hissed to another. "Plain folk don't usually mix with." Her companion's voice trailed off meaningfully. The sun touched the horizon as Josiah and Annalise made their way down the dusty street, their shadows stretching long behind them. Neither spoke, though the weight of unspoken words hung heavy between them. The deputy's muttered threat about unfinished business followed them like an unwelcome shadow, promising that their troubles were far from over. Josiah guided Annalise down the narrow alley behind Morgan's saloon, the wooden buildings blocking the worst of the townsfolk's stares and whispers. The evening air carried the scent of stale beer and tobacco smoke from the saloon's back door, mixing with the dust their boots kicked up from the packed earth. "This way," Josiah murmured, his hand gentle on her elbow. But Annalise had endured enough. She jerked her arm free, whirling to face him with 2 years of hurt blazing in her eyes. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice low but sharp as a knife. "You lost that right when you disappeared after our wedding day." 2 years, Josiah. 2 years without a word. Josiah's broad shoulders slumped as he removed his hat, working the brim between calloused fingers. "I was weak," he admitted, shame etching deep lines around his mouth. "When the elders learned about our marriage, he swallowed hard. "They said you were neither white nor Amish, said I brought shame to the community, so you ran back to them." Annalise finished, bitterness coating each word. "Left me alone to face the consequences. I never stopped loving you," Josiah protested, reaching toward her before letting his hand fall. "But I was raised to respect the elders' wisdom. I thought perhaps they knew better than my heart." "Your heart?" Annalise's laugh held no warmth. "While you wrestled with your conscience, I lost everything. The town blamed me for leading you astray. No one would hire me. I nearly starved that first winter." Pain flickered across Josiah's features. Before he could respond, the sharp tap of boots on wooden planks interrupted them. A well-dressed man rounded the corner, papers clutched in one manicured hand. "How touching," Mr. Silas Cutler drawled, his city clothes marking him as clearly as his sneering tone. "The prodigal husband returns." Annalise stiffened, recognizing the railroad lawyer who'd been pressuring her for months. Cutler held up his documents with a flourish. "These papers show you're squatting on land vital to the railroad's expansion," he announced. "That spring on your property is exactly where we need to water our locomotives. That land was my father's," Annalise countered. "He left it to me legal and proper." Cutler's lip curled. "Did he now?" "Funny how no one can find those deed papers." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Today's auction wasn't about debts, my dear. It was about solving our little half-breed problem." Josiah surged forward, his fists clenching. "Watch your tongue, mister." Annalise grabbed Josiah's arm, steadying him even as anger burned in her own chest. The truth clicked into place like the tumblers of a lock. "The spring," she breathed. "That's what this is really about. Smart girl," Cutler smirked. "Though not smart enough to know when you're beaten. The railroad always gets what it wants." He tapped his papers against his palm. "One way or another. We'll see about that," Josiah growled. Cutler merely smiled, tucking the papers into his coat. "Fighting the railroad is like fighting the tide, friend. Best learn to swim." He touched the brim of his hat mockingly. "Good evening to you both." They watched him stride away, his boots clicking against the wooden sidewalk as he emerged onto the main street. The saloon's noise seemed distant now, overwhelmed by the weight of this new threat. "Come on," Josiah said quietly. "I know a place will be safe tonight." Annalise hesitated, then nodded. They walked to where Josiah's wagon waited, climbing up onto the wooden seat. The horses' hooves raised small clouds of dust as they headed out of town, following a trail that wound through scrubby hills dotted with pine and cedar. The line shack appeared as the last light faded from the sky, a humble structure Josiah had used during his cattle working days. He lit a brass lantern while Annalise stood in the doorway, taking in the simple furnishings: a rough table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed pushed against one wall. The lantern's glow cast jumping shadows as they sat at the table, neither quite ready to break the tense silence. The flame reflected in Annalise's eyes as she stared at her folded hands, the weight of the day's events pressing down like a physical thing. Josiah watched her from across the table, his face lined with regret and worry, as the night settled deep around the lonely shack. Josiah moved to the small cupboard in the corner of the line shack, pulling out a dented pot and some supplies. "I keep beans and bread stored here," he said, his voice gentle in the lamplight. "You should eat something." Annalise sat rigid in her chair as he prepared the simple meal, her back straight despite her exhaustion. When he placed a tin plate before her, she took only small bites, her movements precise and controlled. Pride kept her from showing how hungry she truly was. Through the single window, white flakes began to drift past the glass. The snow fell silent and steady, adding another layer to the thick quiet between them. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing warm light across the wooden floor as they ate. Finally, Josiah set down his spoon. "I've been fighting myself these 2 years," he admitted, his voice rough. "The Amish way teaches obedience to community and elders. But my heart," he looked at her directly, "my heart has never stopped crying out for you." Annalise pushed her half-eaten plate away. "Did you claim me today only to ease your guilty conscience?" she asked, her words barely above a whisper. "To make yourself feel righteous after abandoning me?" "No," Josiah said firmly. "I came because I love you still. Because seeing you bound on that platform tore my heart in two." He bowed his head. "But I was a coward before, and I must own that truth. When the elders threatened to shun me, I chose the easy path. I betrayed our vows." The confession hung in the air between them. Outside, the snow fell thicker, dusting the windowsill with white. Annalise's fingers traced patterns on the rough wooden table, but she didn't speak. As the evening deepened, Josiah rose to prepare the narrow cot against the wall. He pulled a wool blanket from his saddlebag, shaking it out with careful hands. "You take the bed," he offered. "I'll sleep in my bedroll." "No." Annalise gathered her skirts and moved to the fireplace. "I'll take the floor." She settled herself there, using her shawl as a pillow, making it clear she wouldn't share his bed. Josiah nodded, respecting her choice. He spread his bedroll on the cot and knelt beside it. In the firelight, his broad shoulders curved as he bowed his head in prayer. "Lord," he spoke softly but clear enough for his words to carry, "I thank you for this second chance, though I deserve it not. Guide my steps that I might prove worthy of the grace you've shown me this day." His voice caught. "And protect this good woman who has suffered from my weakness." In the shadows by the fire, Annalise lay still, tears sliding silently down her cheeks as she listened to his earnest words. The flames blurred before her eyes as she turned her face away, unwilling to let him see how his prayer had moved her. Dawn broke cold and gray, the snow having settled into a thin blanket across the clearing. The sharp sound of an axe splitting wood carried through the crisp morning air. Josiah had risen early, attacking the woodpile with steady strokes. Annalise emerged from the shack, her breath clouding in the winter air. Without a word, she picked up a second axe that leaned against the wall. Her hands, unused to such work, quickly developed blisters as she swung the tool. Still, she persisted, refusing to show any sign of weakness. They worked side by side, the rhythmic thunk of their axes filling the morning. Neither spoke, the silence between them still strained with hurt and uncertainty. Yet there was something in their shared labor that felt like a beginning, each stroke of the axe clearing away a small piece of the wall between them. Josiah glanced at her occasionally, noting how she winced when the axe handle rubbed against her tender palms. He wanted to tell her to stop, to let him do this work, but he recognized the determination in her face. This was about more than cutting wood. It was about proving her strength, to him and to herself. The morning grew brighter as they worked, the sun breaking through the clouds to sparkle on the snow. Their breath rose in steamy clouds, and sweat dampened their clothes despite the cold. The pile of split wood grew steadily between them, each piece a testament to their shared effort, even as they remained unsure how to bridge the gap of trust that stretched between them. Morning light filtered through the frost-covered window as Annalise stirred a pot of porridge over the cookfire. Josiah added kindling to the flames, the wooden spoon scraping against the iron pot's bottom as she worked to prevent burning. A faint sound caught her attention. She paused, head tilted. There it was again, a weak cough carried on the winter wind, seeming to come from near the barn. "Did you hear that?" she asked, setting down the spoon. Before Josiah could answer, another cough echoed through the morning air. Annalise hurried to the door, pulling her shawl tight against the cold. She waded through the fresh snow, following the sound to a drift piled against the barn's weathered boards. There, half buried in white, lay a small figure. Her heart clenched as she brushed away the snow, revealing a familiar face. "Caleb?" she gasped, recognizing the boy from her days serving at the mission. His skin was pale as milk, lips tinged an alarming blue. "Josiah, come quickly." Josiah appeared at her side in long strides. Without hesitation, he scooped up the child's limp form. "He's burning with fever," he said, carrying Caleb toward the cabin. Inside, they wrapped him in every blanket they could find. Annalise heated broth while Josiah built up the fire. Her hands trembled as she lifted the boy's head, carefully spooning warm liquid between his cracked lips. "That's it, little one," she murmured, stroking his dark hair back from his forehead. The gesture came naturally, memories flooding back of caring for him at the mission. He'd always been a fragile child, prone to illness. Josiah grabbed his coat. "I'll ride to the meadow. There's yarrow growing there, and elderberry if the snow hasn't covered it all." He paused at the door. "Will you be all right alone with him?" Annalise nodded, not taking her eyes from Caleb's face. As Josiah's boots crunched away in the snow, the boy's eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. "Miss Annalise?" he whispered, voice raspy. "I knew I'd find you." His small hand reached for hers. "Mama said you'd be my family now." Tears pricked at her eyes as she squeezed his fingers gently. "Rest now, little one," she soothed, watching as his eyes drifted closed again. When Josiah returned with herbs, his arms full of winter-hardy plants, he stopped in the doorway. Annalise sat in the rocking chair, Caleb cradled against her chest as she hummed softly. The sight stirred something in his heart, a reminder of her endless capacity for tenderness, how she'd always reached out to those in need. They worked together as the day waned, steeping herbs, changing cool cloths on Caleb's forehead, coaxing him to drink. But as night fell, his fever spiked. The boy thrashed beneath the blankets, shivering violently despite the heat pouring off his skin. Josiah knelt beside the bed, his large hands clasped in prayer. "Lord, spare this child," he pleaded, voice rough with emotion. "Guide our hands to heal him." Annalise sat on the bed's edge, gathering Caleb into her arms. As his restless movements continued, she began to sing, a melody that seemed to rise from deep in her soul. The Comanche lullaby her mother had sung to her, words of comfort and protection flowing like water. The boy's trembling gradually eased as her voice filled the cabin. His breathing steadied, becoming deeper and more regular. Josiah watched in wonder as peace settled over Caleb's features. The power of her song working like medicine. As the last notes faded, Annalise looked up to find Josiah's eyes on her. In the lamplight, something passed between them, a moment of understanding, of shared purpose. The wall of hurt and mistrust had cracked, just slightly, making room for something new to grow. The lamp's flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls as they kept their vigil. Together they watched over the sleeping child, this unexpected gift that had brought them to common ground. Though neither spoke it aloud, both felt the shift, like the first warm breeze of spring after a long, hard winter. By Sunday morning, the snow clouds finally parted, revealing a crisp blue sky. Josiah had borrowed old Jim Peterson's mule and wagon, laying fresh straw on the bed to cushion their ride. He helped Annalise settle Caleb among blankets, the boy's cheeks showing more color than they had in days. The wagon wheels creaked as they made their way down the rutted road, Pastor Whitcomb's white-clapboard church. Caleb pointed at frost-sparkled branches, his quiet giggles warming the winter air. Though still weak, his fever had broken, leaving him eager to see more than the cabin's four walls. As they pulled up to the hitching post, curious faces turned their way. Women in their Sunday best paused on the church steps, fans fluttering as they whispered behind gloved hands. Josiah helped Annalise down from the wagon, then gently lifted Caleb. Inside, lamplight glowed against honey-colored pine walls. Pastor Whitcomb stood at the door, his weathered face creasing into a welcoming smile. "Brother Josiah," he said warmly, clasping Josiah's hand. "And this must be Annalise?" "Yes, sir." "My wife," Josiah said clearly, meeting the questioning gazes around them. Annalise lifted her chin, though her fingers tightened on her shawl. The pastor guided them to a pew near the front, his kind eyes taking in Caleb's wan face. "And who's this young fellow?" "I'm Caleb," the boy whispered, managing a shy smile. "Well now, Caleb," Pastor Whitcomb said, pulling a worn Bible from his coat. "Did you know Jesus had special words about children?" He opened to a marked page and read, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Caleb's face brightened. "Really? He said that about children like me?" "He surely did." The pastor's eyes twinkled as he ruffled Caleb's hair, drawing a delighted laugh from the boy. After the congregation settled, Pastor Whitcomb drew Josiah and Annalise aside. His expression grew serious. "Your marriage being secret, unregistered with proper authorities, it may not offer the protection you need." Josiah's jaw tightened. "What do you suggest?" "A public reaffirmation of your vows, before God and community. Make it official in every way possible." "Yes," Josiah said firmly. "We'll do it." Annalise stiffened beside him. "The townsfolk will never accept it," she said softly. "They see only my mixed blood." The pastor squeezed her shoulder gently. "Some hearts may be hard, but God sees no such divisions." Throughout the service, whispers rustled like dry leaves. Some women smiled encouragingly at Annalise, while others turned away with pointed looks. Mrs. Peterson, the mule owner's wife, actually winked when she caught Annalise's eye. As the congregation filed out into the bright winter morning, a familiar figure lounged against the hitching post. Cutler's expensive coat seemed out of place among the townsfolk's simple dress. "How touching," he drawled, pushing his hat back. "But sentiment won't change facts. The railroad won't tolerate half-breed ownership of vital water rights." Josiah's hands curled into fists as he stepped forward. "Mind your tongue when speaking of my wife." Cutler's hand drifted toward his vest pocket. "Or what, Amish man? You'll pray at me?" Pastor Whitcomb moved between them, his usually gentle voice stern. "This is holy ground, Mr. Cutler. Take your threats elsewhere." The lawyer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just delivering a friendly warning." He touched his hat brim and strolled away, boots crunching on frost-covered ground, The ride home was quiet, each lost in thought. Josiah handled the reins with careful attention, guiding the mule around icy patches. "The pastor's right," he said finally. "We must defend our marriage openly, make it ironclad legal. The land, too." Annalise stared at her hands folded in her lap. "Another public ceremony? More stares and whispers?" Her voice wavered slightly. "I don't know if I can bear it." A peal of laughter interrupted her fears. Caleb pointed at a jackrabbit bounding across the snowy field, his face alight with simple joy. Despite herself, Annalise smiled. The boy's presence reminded her that hope could spring up in the most unexpected places. Like early flowers pushing through winter's crust, the wagon rolled on toward home, leaving the church spire behind. Though questions and fears still pressed close, Caleb's continued giggles kept the shadows at bay. At least for now. The afternoon sun slanted through the cabin windows as Josiah worked on the loose shutters. His hammer tapped steadily, securing the hinges that winter winds had rattled free. Inside, savory smells wafted from the cooking pot where Annalise stirred a thick stew, made possible by the potatoes Mrs. Peterson and 2 other church ladies had pressed into her hands after service. Caleb darted between them like a busy sparrow, his earlier weakness giving way to growing strength. "Can I help, Josiah?" he called, watching the careful repair work with eager eyes. "Reckon you can hold these nails for me?" Josiah smiled, patting the wooden step beside him. The boy scrambled up, chest puffing with importance as Josiah placed 3 iron nails in his small palm. The peaceful hours stretched on, marked by the rhythmic sounds of cooking and carpentry. When the shutters hung straight and true, Josiah settled on the porch step with Caleb. From his pocket, he drew out a smooth piece of pine and a small knife. "Watch careful now," he said, showing Caleb how to hold the wood away from himself. With patient strokes, he demonstrated how to whittle, peeling away thin curls of pine that released their sharp, sweet scent into the air. Inside, Annelise's gentle humming floated through the open door, a melody that mingled German hymn with Comanche lullaby. The sound wrapped around them like a warm blanket, making the small cabin feel more like home with each passing moment. As dusk approached, they gathered around the table where steam rose from bowls of potato stew. Josiah removed his hat and bowed his head. "Lord," he prayed, his voice rough with emotion, "thank you for this food, and for this chance to be a true husband this time. Help me be worthy of it." Annelise's eyes glistened in the lamplight. Under the table, she reached for Caleb's small hand and squeezed it gently. The boy squeezed back, a contented smile playing on his lips as he dug into his stew with his free hand. After the dishes were cleared, Josiah spread paper on the table, sketching plans by lamplight. His pencil moved carefully, marking measurements for roof repairs that couldn't wait past spring thaw. As he worked, his mind wandered to summer gardens and perhaps a proper bedroom for Caleb. Simple dreams, but precious ones. The fire popped and crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Caleb sat cross-legged on the floor, attempting to whittle his own stick under Annelise's watchful eye. His tongue poked out in concentration as he worked. "Look," he exclaimed, holding up a somewhat lopsided attempt. "It's almost pointed." "Fine work," Josiah praised, making the boy beam with pride. Annelise's laugh joined Caleb's giggle, the sounds filling the cabin with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. For the first time since they'd arrived, the rough-hewn walls felt truly like home. The peaceful moment shattered at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Josiah rose, hand automatically reaching for the door as sharp knocking echoed through the cabin. Outside stood a young man on horseback, breath frosting in the cold air. "Message for Mrs. Summer," he announced, extending a folded paper. Josiah took it, pressing a coin into the messenger's palm before closing the door against the night air. His fingers were steady as he unfolded the document, but his jaw tightened as he read. "It's from the railroad company," he said quietly. "A legal summons." They're demanding you vacate the land. Annalise. Caleb scrambled up from the floor, pressing against Annalise's skirts. What does that mean? He whispered, eyes wide with sudden fear. Hush now, Annalise soothed, drawing him close. She murmured soft words in his ear, a mixture of German and Comanche that seemed to calm him despite not understanding the words. Josiah folded the paper with deliberate care, his expression grim in the firelight. We won't yield, he stated firmly. This land is yours by right, and we'll prove it. The fire continued to snap and pop in the hearth, but its cheerful sound now seemed at odds with the tension that filled the room. Caleb's arms tightened around Annalise's waist as she stroked his hair, her eyes meeting Josiah's across the suddenly quiet cabin. The peaceful evening had vanished like smoke up the chimney, leaving only shadows of the conflict to come. Dawn painted the sky in watercolor hues as Josiah saddled the borrowed mule. The morning air bit sharp and clean, his breath frosting in small clouds. Through the cabin window, lamplight glowed warm where Annalise prepared breakfast with Caleb's eager help. I'll be back before sunset, Josiah promised, adjusting his hat. Annalise nodded from the doorway, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. Caleb waved until Josiah disappeared down the snow-dusted trail toward town. Mules' hooves crunched through patches of frost as Josiah guided it past scattered homesteads. His mind turned over plans and possibilities, prayers mixing with practical concerns. The railroad might have money and influence, but surely some folks would stand for what was right. The mercantile's bell jingled as Josiah entered. Morning shoppers paused their business, watching him with curious eyes. He removed his hat, addressing them directly. Friends, he began, I come seeking support against an injustice. The railroad means to steal land and water rights from my wife, land she holds legal claim to. Whispers rippled through the store. Mrs. Turner, arranging dry goods, shook her head. That company builds the future. Mr. Yoder, best not to stand in their way. They ruined my brother's farm in Kansas, another man added. Took everything he had in legal fees before he gave up. Josiah's heart sank as he watched faces turn away, shoulders hunching with the weight of fear. But then heavy boots scraped the wooden floor as Magnus Anderson, the town's blacksmith, stepped forward. The railroad's been squeezing folks dry, the big man rumbled, his beard still flecked with forged smoke. Time somebody took a stand. You have my word as witness about that water source. Yoder, I've drunk from it myself. Hope flickered as Widow Chun spoke up from near the penny candy jars. My well went dry last summer, she said quietly. That spring on your wife's land kept my garden alive. I have seed potatoes stored. They're yours if you need them. Back at the cabin, Annalise swept the hearth while Caleb lay on his belly nearby. The boy had found a stick and was drawing in the scattered ashes, his small face intent with concentration. What are you making? Annalise asked, pausing her work. It's our house, Caleb explained, pointing to his creation. See? Here's the garden with tall corn, and flowers for you, and a fence Josiah will build. His stick moved carefully, adding details to the ashy scene. And here's us, all together. Annalise's throat tightened as she studied the simple drawings. In the boy's imagination, she saw more than childish pictures. She saw hope sketched in gray dust, dreams of belonging traced by small fingers that trusted in tomorrow. The sun hung low when hoofbeats announced Josiah's return. His shoulders were slumped with weariness, but his eyes held quiet determination as he shared the day's events over supper. Most folks are scared, he admitted, breaking corn bread into his bowl. But Magnus Anderson promised to witness about the spring water. And Widow Chun offered seed potatoes, says she remembers your kindness last summer. The Chun family's garden fed half the town, Annalise said softly. I couldn't let it wither. After the dishes were cleared, they knelt together by the fire. Josiah's prayer was simple but heartfelt, asking for guidance and strength. Caleb's small hand found its way into Annelise's as the words washed over them. Later, with Caleb sleeping soundly on his pallet, Annelise watched Josiah bank the fire for the night. The question that had burned in her heart all day finally found voice. "Why did you really come back?" She asked quietly. "Why claim me now, after so long?" Josiah's hands stilled on the poker. He turned to face her, firelight catching the silver threads in his beard. "I was delivering lumber 2 towns over," he said slowly. "Heard talk of the auction. Of you." His voice roughened. 2 years of silence ate at my soul, Annelise. When I learned what they planned, he drew a deep breath. My heart could bear it no longer. The shame of my cowardice grew too heavy to carry. Their eyes met across the dimming light. Something sparked in that gaze, a warmth that had nothing to do with the banked fire, a reminder of what they'd once shared. "I never stopped loving you," he said simply. "Never will." The crackling embers filled the silence between them, casting soft shadows that danced across their faces. In that moment, the distance of 2 years began to narrow, like ice melting at winter's end. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows as Annelise spread fabric across the rough-hewn table. Church ladies had brought scraps of calico and soft blues and creams, enough to piece together a wedding dress. Her fingers moved steadily with needle and thread, each stitch a small act of hope. Across the room, Josiah stood at the wash basin, scrubbing his best plain shirt with lye soap until his knuckles turned red. The white fabric gleamed in the morning light as he worked, determined to look proper for their reaffirmation ceremony. "Is it clean enough yet?" Caleb asked, perched on a stool nearby. The boy's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Almost," Josiah replied, wringing water from the sleeve. "A man should look his best when he makes promises before God." Annelise glanced up from her sewing, catching the tender look in Josiah's eyes. Her heart quickened as she remembered their first wedding, hasty words spoken in moonlight, love stronger than fear. This time would be different. This time they would stand proud before everyone. "Pastor Whitcomb gave me verses to practice," Caleb announced, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "He says I can help with the ceremony." "That's wonderful," Annelise smiled, watching the boy carefully sound out the words. "Love is patient. Love is kind." Later that afternoon, Caleb slipped outside, returning with hands full of prairie wildflowers, purple asters and golden black-eyed Susans that had survived the early frost. "For your bouquet, Mama," he said shyly, offering them to Annelise. She gathered him close, breathing in the sweet scent of flowers and childhood. As evening approached, they gathered near the fireplace to practice their vows. Josiah's strong voice trembled with emotion as he spoke the sacred words. "I promise before God and these witnesses to love and cherish you, to honor and protect you, until death parts us." Annelise squeezed his calloused hand, her own voice steady and clear. The lamplight caught tears in both their eyes, not tears of sorrow this time, but of healing. A gentle knock at the door surprised them. Magnus Anderson stood there, his wife Sarah beside him holding a covered dish. Behind them, Widow Chun smiled, carrying a basket of fresh-baked bread. "We came to wish you well," Magnus said gruffly. "Railroad men be damned." More neighbors appeared through the gathering dusk, not many, but enough to fill the small cabin with warmth and fellowship. They brought what they could spare: beans, cornbread, preserves. Soon the table groaned with simple plenty. Laughter filled the cabin as they shared the meal. Caleb moved between guests, proudly showing his scripture verses. The boy paused between Josiah and Annelise, declaring with complete certainty, "I'm going to be their son forever, now." Widow Chun patted his head. "You already are, little one. Look how they love you." After the neighbors departed, the small family stepped outside into the clear night. Stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage. Josiah drew Annelise close, his arms strong around her shoulders. "I swear by those stars," he whispered. I'll never hide you away again. Never be ashamed. You're my wife, my beautiful, brave wife." Annalise leaned into his embrace, careful hope blooming in her heart. The night felt blessed, as if God himself had painted the sky for their joy. Caleb danced ahead of them, chasing fireflies that sparkled like earthbound stars. They couldn't see the dark figure watching from the distant ridge. Cutler sat motionless on his horse, plans for destruction already taking shape in his mind. But in this moment, beneath heaven's canopy, the little family knew only peace. "Thank you," Annalise murmured, her head resting against Josiah's shoulder. "For what?" "For coming back. For choosing love over fear." Josiah pressed a kiss to her hair, and together they watched their son chase starlight through the grass. Morning sunlight streamed through the church's wavy glass windows, casting golden patterns across the wooden pews. Pastor Whitcomb stood at the door of his modest clapboard church, greeting each townsperson with a warm handshake and gentle smile. Women in their Sunday best whispered behind gloved hands, while men shifted in stiff collars, all eyes watching the dirt path leading to the church steps. The spring breeze carried the scent of wild roses as Josiah and Annalise approached hand in hand. Her calico dress, lovingly pieced together from gifted scraps, caught the morning light. Josiah walked tall in his freshly scrubbed white shirt, his broad-brimmed hat held respectfully at his side. Caleb skipped ahead of them, his small hands clutching a basket of prairie wildflowers. Pride shone in his eyes as he scattered petals along the church aisle, some falling crooked, others floating perfectly to the wooden floor. A few of the townswomen dabbed their eyes at the sight, touched by the boy's earnest efforts. As Annalise and Josiah reached the front of the church, Pastor Whitcomb opened his worn Bible. Sunlight caught the gold leaf on its edges, making it glow like a holy beacon. The congregation settled into hushed anticipation. "Dearly beloved," Whitcomb began, his voice carrying to the rafters, "we gather today to witness the public declaration of marriage between Josiah Yoder and Annalise Summer." Josiah turned to face his bride, his steady hands taking both of hers. His voice rang clear and strong through the church. "I, Josiah, take thee, Annalise, to be my wedded wife. Before God and these witnesses, I pledge to love, honor, and protect you all the days of my life." Tears welled in Annalise's eyes as she trembled slightly, overwhelmed by the moment. Her voice wavered but grew stronger with each word. "I, Annalise, take thee, Josiah." The heavy church doors burst open with a thunderous crack. Bright sunlight silhouetted dark figures in the doorway as Silas Cutler strode in, flanked by 4 armed railroad men. Their boots echoed on the wooden floor like hammer falls. "This ceremony is a fraud." Cutler's voice cut through the sacred silence. He pulled papers from his coat, waving them above his head. "This woman abandoned her claim. The land belongs to the railroad now." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Women clutched their children closer while men half rose from their pews, uncertain whether to intervene. "That's a lie." Josiah moved to stand between Cutler and Annalise. His shoulders squared. The nearest railroad man swung his rifle like a club, catching Josiah across the temple with the wooden stock. He crumpled to one knee as 2 men seized his arms, dragging him toward the door. "This is a house of God." Pastor Whitcomb stepped forward, his Bible clutched to his chest. "You have no right." One of the gunmen pressed his rifle barrel against the pastor's chest, forcing him back against the altar rail. "Sit down, preacher. This ain't your business." "Josiah!" Annalise's scream pierced the air as rough hands grabbed her arms. "Let me go. You'll be escorted to Indian territory where you belong," Cutler sneered, his face twisted with cruel satisfaction. "Can't have squatters interfering with progress, Mama." Caleb wailed, dropping his flower basket and clutching Annalise's skirts. His small fingers twisted in the fabric as he sobbed. "Don't take my mama." The scattered flowers lay crushed beneath heavy boots as chaos erupted in the church. Women began crying, children whimpered, and men shouted in confusion and anger. The morning sunlight that had blessed the ceremony now cast harsh shadows across faces contorted with fear and hatred. "Please," Annalise begged as the men pulled her toward the door, Caleb still clinging desperately to her dress. "He's just a boy, you can't." Through blurred vision, she saw Josiah struggling against his captors, blood trickling from his temple. Their eyes met across the chaos of the church, a moment of desperate love amid the destruction of their dreams. Pastor Whitcomb's voice rose above the tumult, quoting scripture even as the rifle barrel pressed harder against his chest. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." But his words were drowned by Caleb's heartbreaking sobs and the heavy tread of boots on scattered flower petals as the railroad men tightened their grip on their prisoners, dragging them toward the bright doorway and the waiting wagons beyond. Josiah's head throbbed as consciousness returned. Cold stone pressed against his cheek, and iron shackles bit into his wrists. Pushing himself to sitting, he winced at the purple bruise spreading across his temple where the rifle stock had struck. The town jail's single window revealed heavy clouds gathering above. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I failed her once before. Please don't let me fail Annalise again. Give me strength to protect her and Caleb." The cell door's hinges creaked. Deputy Thomas Hawley approached cautiously, carrying a tin cup of water. His young face showed concern as he glanced over his shoulder before speaking softly. "Here." Thomas offered the cup through the bars. "Some of us lawmen still answer to God, not railroad money." Josiah's hands shook as he drank. "Where did they take her?" "Old wagon house by the livery," Thomas whispered. "Railroad men plan to move them at first light." He fidgeted with his deputy's badge. "What they're doing ain't right, but I'm just one man." "Thank you," Josiah said, reading the conflict in the young deputy's eyes. "For showing kindness." Across town in the wagon house, Annalise held Caleb close as he trembled. Rough wooden walls creaked in the wind, and a single lantern cast wavering shadows. The boy's tears had finally slowed, though his fingers still clutched her dress. "The Lord is my shepherd," she recited softly, stroking his hair. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." Caleb's breathing steadied as she spoke the familiar words, though her own heart ached with fear. The railroad men's boots echoed outside as they paced, rifles ready. She thought of Josiah, praying he still lived after that brutal blow. The afternoon light was fading when Pastor Whitcomb's familiar step approached Josiah's cell. The old preacher's eyes held both worry and determination as he drew close. "Brother," Whitcomb whispered, "God has not forsaken you." His weathered hands pressed something through the bars, a folded parchment, yellowed with age. Josiah's hands trembled as he opened it. There, in faded ink, was their original marriage license from 2 years past. His signature beside Annalise's, witnessed and sealed properly. "I kept it safe," Whitcomb explained quietly, knowing someday truth would need light. He gripped the cell bars. "Hold fast to faith, Josiah. The Lord makes a way where there seems none." Josiah pressed the precious document to his chest, remembering the day he'd first seen Annalise. She had been tending wounded children at the mission, her gentle hands cleaning scrapes and binding cuts. Her voice had been soft as she sang both hymns and Comanche healing songs, bridging 2 worlds with love. He had fallen for her that very day, watching her braid a little girl's hair while telling stories of Jesus walking on water. Now touching the marriage license, his resolve hardened like steel. He would not lose her again. In the wagon house, night descended early as snow began to fall. Annalise tucked her shawl tighter on Caleb's sleeping form. Her whispered prayers rose in both her father's German and her mother's Comanche tongue. "Vater unser im Himmel," she breathed, then switched to her mother's words, asking the spirits for courage. The snow fell thicker, muffling all sound except her quiet voice and Caleb's steady breathing. She thought of Josiah's strong hands holding hers in the church, his voice steady with love as he spoke his vows. Whatever came with dawn, she would face it with the same strength that had carried her between two worlds all her life. Through the deepening night, across the distance separating them, both Josiah and Annalise clung to hope. In his cell, he traced their names on the marriage license, while in the wagon house, she hummed lullabies to keep fear at bay. The snow continued falling, blanketing the town in hushed white, as if nature itself held its breath waiting for morning. Josiah's prayer rose soft but fierce in the darkness. Lord, give me one more chance to be the husband she deserves. He pressed his forehead against the cold bars, clutching the proof of their love. Let me keep my promise this time. In the wagon house, Annelise's mingled prayers carried the same desperate hope. Tomorrow would bring either deliverance or deeper trials, but tonight they each found strength and faith and memory. Separated by walls but united in heart. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in streaks of pale gold. Fresh snow blanketed the town, but underneath, something powerful stirred. Word of the violent wedding disruption spread from porch to porch, store to store, as townspeople shook their heads in disgust. Outside the blacksmith's shop, hammers fell silent as workers gathered. The widow McAllister, her gray hair escaping her bonnet, gripped her shawl against the cold. The railroad's gone too far this time, she declared. Breaking up a holy ceremony with guns? That ain't Christian nor American. The blacksmith, stood still marking his forearms, nodded gravely. Time we showed them money ain't everything. He set down his tools and began walking toward the church, the widow at his side. Others fell in behind them, faces set with determination. In the jail, Deputy Thomas Hale's boots scraped against the wooden floor as he approached Josiah's cell. His young face was drawn with worry, but his eyes held purpose. Glancing over his shoulder, he pulled a key from his vest. "Mr. Yoder," he whispered, "the town needs you free. Can't right this wrong with you behind bars." Josiah stood slowly, his conscience warring with necessity. "Breaking the law ain't our way, Deputy." Thomas pressed the key forward. "Sometimes the law needs reminding about justice. I swear before God, this is righteous." After a long moment, Josiah's calloused hand closed around the key. His prayer was silent but fervent as he turned it in the lock. At the wagon house, Annalise cradled Caleb close, her voice soft as morning light as she sang the hymns of her childhood. The boy's eyes were wide, but trusting as her German words filled their makeshift prison with hope. Outside, boots crunched in snow as more townspeople gathered. Pastor Whitcomb's voice rang out in the town square, carrying above the murmur of the growing crowd. He stood on the church steps, Bible held high, his weathered face fierce with righteous anger. "The Lord our God stands with truth," he proclaimed. "Not with greed, not with violence against the innocent." His words drew people from their homes and shops, adding to the swelling crowd. When Pharaoh's men oppressed the people, did God remain silent? When Daniel faced the lions, did the Lord abandon him? By afternoon, the crowd had grown to several dozen strong. Torches flared to life despite the falling snow, their flames reflected in determined eyes. Women who had once turned away from Annalise now stood shoulder to shoulder with men who had mocked her. Heritage. The railroad men shifted uneasily, fingering their weapons as they watched the townspeople advance. But even they could count the odds. Faced with a united town, their swagger faltered. One by one, they began backing toward the depot, their threats dying in their throats. Josiah found the wagon house door unguarded. His hands trembled as he lifted the bar. Inside, Annalise looked up, Caleb still wrapped in her arms. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other. Then they came together in a fierce embrace. Caleb caught between them, their hearts pounding with relief and love. "I thought," Annelise's voice broke. "Never again," Josiah promised, his arms tightening around his family. "God is my witness, never again will I let them separate us." They emerged into fading daylight to find the town had formed a protective circle around them. The widow McAllister pressed a warm loaf of bread into Annelise's hands. The blacksmith clapped Josiah's shoulder. Pastor Whitcomb raised his voice once more. "Tomorrow at dawn, we'll see justice done proper and legal," he announced. "The railroad may own the tracks, but they don't own our souls." A chorus of amens rose from the crowd. Even Deputy Thomas, standing at the edge of the gathering, nodded firmly. As night settled over the town, lamps glowed in every window like beacons of courage. Neighbors shared coffee and blankets in the street, standing watch together. The sound of hymns drifted on the night air as hope spread from heart to heart, strong as a prairie fire. In the sanctuary of the church, Josiah held Annelise's hand while Caleb slept on a pew nearby. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight they were together, surrounded by a community that had finally chosen to stand for what was right. The morning sun crept over the eastern hills, painting the fresh snow in delicate shades of rose and gold. Steam rose from coffee cups as townspeople gathered in the square, their breath visible in the crisp winter air. The crowd grew steadily, forming a circle of warmth and purpose in the heart of town. Josiah and Ellie stood together near the courthouse steps, their shoulders touching. Caleb's small hand gripped Annelise's skirts tightly, his face bright with anticipation. The boy had insisted on wearing his best shirt, though it was slightly too large, a gift from the widow McAllister. Pastor Whitcomb ascended the courthouse steps, his Bible tucked under one arm. With deliberate care, he withdrew a weathered parchment, the original marriage license that had been hidden away for 2 long years. He held it high, letting morning light illuminate the faded ink. "Good people of our town," his voice rang clear across the square, "I hold here proof of what God has already blessed. This document, properly signed and witnessed, confirms the legal marriage of Josiah Yoder and Annalise Summer." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The blacksmith stepped forward, his massive frame commanding attention. "I've known Josiah Yoder since he first came to town. He's an honest man who pays his debts and helps his neighbors. That's worth more than any railroad money." The widow McAllister spoke next, her voice quavering but determined. "And I've seen how Annalise tends the sick and helps those in need, no matter their background. She's got more Christian charity in her little finger than some folks show in a lifetime." Deputy Thomas Hawley moved to stand beside them, his badge gleaming in the morning light. "As an officer of the law, I testify that these documents are genuine. The attempted auction was illegal, and the railroad's claims are based on forged papers." From the edge of the crowd, Silas Cutler pushed forward, his face mottled with rage. "This is preposterous. The railroad's rights don't include breaking up families or stealing land through fraud." Thomas interrupted firmly. The crowd pressed closer, faces set with determination. Cutler's hired men shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how badly they were outnumbered. The sheriff emerged from his office, taking in the scene with grave eyes. He crossed to where his corrupt deputy stood apart from Thomas, and with swift motions stripped the badge from the man's vest. "We serve the law here," he declared, "not railroad money." Josiah stepped forward then, his plain black hat held respectfully in his hands. His voice carried clearly across the square, steady and sure. "I stand here to declare before God and all of you that I am Annelise's husband. I was wrong to hide our marriage, wrong to let fear rule my heart. But I aim to make it right, to live openly and proudly with my wife and son." Annelise's eyes filled with tears as she lifted her chin, years of shame falling away like snow from a branch in spring sunshine. Caleb bounced on his toes, unable to contain his joy. Cutler made one last attempt, stepping forward with a threatening gesture. "The railroad will not forget this defiance. We have means of—" "Get out." The widow McAllister's voice cracked like a whip. "Take your threats and your forged papers and leave our town be." The crowd moved as one, closing ranks around Josiah, Annalise, and Caleb. Cutler's face twisted, but even he could read the writing on the wall. With a sharp gesture to his men, He turned on his heel and stalked toward the depot, his coattails flapping in the morning breeze as the railroad men retreated. The tension broke like ice in spring. Women who had once crossed the street to avoid Annalise now came forward with embraces and tears of welcome. Men shook Josiah's hand, offering congratulations and promises of help with spring planting. Caleb, grinning from ear to ear, couldn't contain himself any longer. He tugged at the blacksmith's sleeve. "They're my parents now," he announced proudly. "A real family, just like I prayed for." The boy's innocent joy broke whatever ice remained in people's hearts. Even the most stubborn townspeople found themselves wiping away tears. Pastor Whitcomb raised his hands, and his congregation responded instinctively. The first notes of Amazing Grace rose into the morning air, swelling as more voices joined in. The hymn floated over the square, a testament to the power of love over fear, of community over division. Annelise's clear voice lifted in harmony, her German accent lending beauty to the familiar words. Josiah's deeper tones joined her, and Caleb's piping voice wove between them, creating a family melody that touched every heart in the square. The spring morning dawned bright and clear, warming the valley where Annelise's precious spring bubbled from the earth. Josiah and Annalise stood hand in hand near the flowing water, watching as people began arriving from both town and the distant Comanche camps. Annalise had sent word through her mother's kin, inviting them to share in this day of reconciliation. Now, Comanche families approached on horseback, their children's eyes bright with curiosity. They carried woven baskets filled with dried berries and fresh-baked corn cakes, traditional offerings of peace and celebration. "Welcome," Annalise called out in both English and Comanche. "This water is a gift from the Creator. It should bring people together, not drive them apart." The Comanche elders dismounted, their weathered faces dignified as they approached Josiah. The lead elder, Gray Wolf, extended his hand. "Your wife speaks with wisdom," he said in careful English. "We honor her courage." Josiah shook hands firmly, his plain black hat respectfully removed. "The honor is mine," he replied, his voice steady and sincere. From the town road, wagons began arriving. The blacksmith's family brought fresh-baked bread. The widow McAllister carried a pot of honey. Other townspeople followed, bearing food and blankets for the shared feast. At first, the two groups remained separate, uncertainty hanging in the air like morning mist. But Caleb, innocent of adult fears, broke the tension. He raced toward the spring, laughing as he splashed through the crystalline pools. "Come on," he called to the other children. "The water's fine." Soon, children from both communities played together, their giggles echoing across the valley. Parents couldn't help but smile, their own reservations softening as they watched their little ones splash and play without prejudice. Josiah rolled up his sleeves and set to work on the old pump house, its wooden walls weathered by seasons of neglect. Several town men joined him, while Comanche hunters offered advice on reinforcing the structure against prairie winds. Their shared labor bridged gaps that words alone could not cross. Near the spring, Annalise tended a huge pot of stew hanging over an open fire. She added vegetables from town gardens and herbs gathered by Comanche women, creating a meal that blended both traditions. The familiar scent of cooking food drew people closer, encouraging them to sit together on blankets spread across the grass. Pastor Whitcomb arrived mid-morning, his Bible tucked under his arm. He watched the growing gathering with joy shining in his eyes. When the meal was ready, he raised his hands for blessing. "Lord," he prayed, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet valley, "we thank you for this spring of fresh water, this well of mercy. May it forever remind us that your love flows freely for all your children, regardless of their origins." "Amen," came the response, spoken in multiple languages but carrying the same spirit of gratitude. As the sun began its westward journey, more barriers melted away. Comanche elders shared stories of the land's history, while settlers spoke of their own journeys west. Women exchanged recipes and medicine lore, each learning from the other's wisdom. Men discussed hunting grounds and grazing rights, finding ways to share the vast prairie that had seemed too small before. When evening painted the sky in purple and gold, lanterns began to glow like earthbound stars. Someone brought out a fiddle, its sweet notes mixing with the deeper tones of Comanche drums. Children danced together in the firelight, while their parents watched with newfound hope in their hearts. Josiah and Annalise retreated to their porch, where they could observe the joyful gathering. He wrapped his arm around her waist, and she leaned into his strength, her heart too full for words. Caleb bounded up the steps to join them, his face flushed with happiness. "Mama, Papa, look!" he exclaimed, pointing to where townsfolk and Comanche families shared stories around the fires. "Everyone's getting along, just like a big family." Annalise pulled him close, pressing a kiss to his tousled hair. "Yes, little one. That's exactly what we hoped for." Josiah's deep voice was thick with emotion as he added, "This is what God intended, people coming together, not staying apart." From their vantage point, they watched as the valley glowed with lantern light and human warmth. The spring bubbled steadily, its clear voice a reminder that some gifts were meant to be shared, not hoarded. Music drifted up from below, a blend of cultures and traditions that spoke of new beginnings. Their home would stand as a bridge between two worlds, much like Annalise herself. And in this moment, watching their neighbors, both town and tribal, finding common ground beside the ancient spring, they knew they had found their true purpose. The March thaw brought warmth to the valley, melting snow into rivulets that fed Annalise's spring. Winter's grip loosened its hold on their homestead, revealing the first tender shoots of green grass pushing through softening earth. Josiah had spent the cold months making good on his promises. The cabin's roof, once leaky and worn, now stood strong with fresh-laid shingles. A neat fence enclosed a plot for their garden, its wooden posts standing straight and true against the prairie wind. He'd even built a small chicken coop, complete with nesting boxes lined with sweet hay. Inside the cabin, Annalise stirred a pot of savory stew, the familiar scent of herbs and beef filling the warm air. Her quiet humming merged with the gentle bubbling of the pot and the crackle of the cooking fire. The melody was one her mother had taught her long ago, a song about spring's return and new beginnings. Outside, Caleb's laughter rang clear as he chased the chickens, his once frail body now strong enough to run and play. "Come back here, Miss Feathers," he called to a particularly elusive hen. His cheeks were pink with health and happiness, a far cry from the sickly boy they'd found in the snow. The cabin door opened with a familiar creak as Josiah stepped inside, bringing with him the fresh scent of wood shavings and honest work. He set his tools carefully by the door, his movements deliberate and gentle despite his large frame. Without a word, he crossed to where Annalise stood at the stove and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. She leaned back against his chest, letting herself feel the security of his embrace. These quiet moments, once lost to fear and separation, had become precious gifts they shared freely. The peaceful scene burst into joyful chaos as Caleb rushed inside, clutching a leather-bound book to his chest. "Papa, Mama, look what Pastor Whitcomb gave me." His eyes sparkled with excitement as he held up the schoolbook. "He says I'm ready to learn my letters proper." Annalise turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's wonderful, little one. We can practice after supper." They gathered around the table, its surface scrubbed clean and set with tin plates that gleamed in the lamplight. Steam rose from bowls of rich stew, and fresh-baked bread waited to be broken. Josiah bowed his head, leading them in a prayer of gratitude that encompassed far more than just the meal before them. Supper was filled with Caleb's excited chatter about his future studies, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared smiles between Josiah and Annalise. The boys' enthusiasm was infectious, bringing laughter to their evening meal like music. After the dishes were cleared and the kitchen put to rights, Josiah surprised them both. "Come outside," he said softly, taking Annelise's hand. "The stars are bright tonight." They stepped out onto the porch, Caleb rushing ahead to point out the constellations Josiah had taught him. The night air carried the promise of spring, fresh and clean after winter's long rain. Josiah turned to Annelise, taking both her hands in his. His voice was low and fervent as he whispered, "This time, I'll never leave you." The words held the weight of a vow, stronger perhaps than their first wedding promises. Annelise's smile glowed in the starlight as she rested her head against his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath his wool shirt. No words were needed to express her acceptance of his promise. Caleb wedged himself between them, wrapping an arm around each of their waists. "We're a real family now," he declared with the simple certainty of childhood. His words echoed the truth they all felt in their hearts. Across the valley, the church bells tolled the evening hour, their gentle notes carrying on the breeze. Smoke rose from neighboring chimneys, each spiral a sign of homes where families gathered in warmth and peace. Their own cabin glowed with lamplight through its windows, a beacon of hope and second chances realized. Inside waited the schoolbook, the warm hearth, and all the simple treasures that made a house into a home. Together they stood, watching the stars wheel overhead, their hearts full of gratitude for this precious gift of family found and love restored. "Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.